Hello, everyone. Welcome to a new episode of Solo Queue. I'm your host, Michael Damiani. This week, I'm joined by special guest Rebecca Stone. How's it going, Rebecca?
Very good. I am glad to be back, and now especially since the podcast has a name. It didn't have a name
Th-
last time I was here.
that is correct. I was also very excited to get you back on because you were on the first episode. It didn't have a name. It was like just untitled. Didn't even like no logo either. We had a name and then we got the logo. So Gabby at Easy Allies, she made the logo for me. So shout outs to
That's great.
Gabby for that. And she'd been working on that for a little while. So yeah, we got a name, then we got a logo, and now we got an actual talk show podcast here. So
Love it.
took some time, but yes, thank you for returning. So yes, what was it on Hot Mike's chat? We had every time first time caller. The very first time caller in another show we did for a little while. We'd always address them as like first time caller, no matter where they came up. But you also got that distinction here, so thank you again for being on. And
Yeah.
yes, before we dive into it, for those of you who maybe weren't around for the first episode, can you tell our listeners and viewers a little bit about yourself before we start?
Sure. My name is Rebecca. I go by Forest Minish on all socials and whatnot, and you could probably tell by that username that I am a big Zelda fan. I like to post silly things on Twitter, and I stream on Twitch, and I just like to generally talk about video games and fun stuff. So you picked me for the Zelda episode, and I am super ready to talk about
Oh yeah, I knew you would love talking
it.
about this game, and I had like there were a lot of people who wanted to talk about this game, but I was like, no, I think because we the other reason why is because the episode you were on, we were talking about possibilities for like the return of like maybe old school Zelda, and Echoes of Wisdom when it was first unveiled. At least for me, I was like, oh, we're getting top down Zelda at least, so this is something. And will it be like a full return to old school? Well, what is it going to be? Also, starring Zelda, and it's like, okay, they're this is a start. We'll see where they go with this. So I mean, yeah, I was like this. You were very interested in it, but I'm also curious as we'll get into it if you really like. I suspect it wasn't quite exactly like a full return to like old. Obviously, it seems like it definitely is blending old and new. But let's kind of like start with your general thoughts on the game because we have both finished it, and here's the warning I'm going to give you. While we're not going to like intentionally try and spoil every part of the game, and this isn't really a spoiler mode, we both finished a game, and we're going to talk about whatever we want to talk about in
Some
the
late
course
game
of
stuff
this.
might come up.
So yes, some of
Yeah.
that might come up. So just your warning. And I was trying to think of a way to be nuanced. It's just better to be clean and say up front, yeah, this is just gonna have possibly spoilers. So with that warning out of the way, yeah, yeah. What did you think about Echoes of Wisdom? Broad strokes to start with.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about how last time we chatted, we were talking about the future of Zelda and where did they go from here? What do we want them to do from here? And I'm a huge fan of the top-down traditional Zelda style. I think, at this point, maybe I do like the top-down Zelda games a little bit more than the 3D ones, which is probably an unpopular opinion, but where I started, what I grew up with the most. So I was delighted to see that they were kind of returning with a brand new top-down game. We had remake like Link's Awakening, but just to see that they were returning to that with what ended up being traditional style dungeons was something that I wanted desperately. And I was afraid that we weren't going to go back to that after seeing, how many sales Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom got. So I went with high hopes. I have never been somebody that felt like I really needed to play as Princess Zelda in a mainline game. So, like, it's not something that I had ever been really clamoring for or begging Nintendo to do. So, I was a little bit hesitant on that aspect at first, especially because, how can they do that without making it seem forced? Like, she's not a sword fighter, she's royalty. What kind of mechanics are they going to give her? So I was really curious about how the echoes mechanic was really going to work out. Going into it, I was like, is this going to feel like a passive way of fighting and combat? Am I going to feel like I'm not really doing anything but summoning enemies to fight for me? And I don't really feel like it felt like that as I was playing. I felt like they had, incorporated enough puzzles into it that made it interesting to approach in different ways that it didn't feel passive. I felt like I was really actively engaged in the world as I was using echoes. Um, Especially because it has that Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom feel, like I'm solving things in a unique way that other people might not approach. I have watched other people play parts that I had played, and I'm like, wow, like I didn't even know you could do that. I approached that puzzle totally differently. Your mind works so different than mine does. So I think overall, I was really glad to see a return to so many traditional elements of traditional Zelda that I knew and loved growing up. And it took a little while. Like, I feel like there was a learning curve to get into how the echoes worked. So I think once a certain point in the game hit, it really clicked with me a lot more. And I started getting a lot more into it and enjoying once I settled into how it worked. The controls are really overwhelming at first. I don't know if you felt that way too.
Yes, I wanted to definitely agree with the sentiment about the learning curve, especially with like using echoes, and I think like with the control scheme, I streamed my entire playthrough on
Okay.
Twitch, and there were several times I brought up, I feel like I'm just fighting against the controls because the scheme, because it, even though it's called a Zelda game, I was like, oh, combat. I'm just instinctively used to hit this. So, oh no, I have to like in the early goings.
Mhm.
It's like, oh, I don't have this. So, like specifically in combat, I will say, and especially like in boss fights, the earlier ones, it felt like, it felt like a bit chaotic. And I don't know if that was like maybe the intent. And I did feel like at least when they gave me, you had swordsman powers, that was like the bail you out button. It's like, okay, I need to do something. All right, give me the sword so I can at least fight back for a second. And honestly, I understand. I've heard this sentiment from other people too, where they just think, at least in combat specifically, the echo system isn't really gelling with them, and they would like something a little bit more close to what they had before. My thoughts are eventually I got over that hurdle and I had really no difficulty with the combat. I think there was only one boss fight which I just didn't get. I didn't pick up on the gimmick, and when I did it again, there's a mini game area where you go into a dreams and refight. You do challenge arenas and then you like do boss rushes. When I came across that boss again, I knew how. I was like, oh, I now know what you're supposed to do.
Mhm.
It's like the mole boss that also can fly at a
Yeah.
certain point.
Oh, that one took me forever
I
to
didn't
do.
once after the fight. I'm like, oh, that's how you're supposed to counter it. I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, I mean, obviously, I didn't do it that way. So, like, again, speaking to what you said earlier about the creative freedom you have, not just in how you explore and traverse the world, but how you tackle bosses, it
Multiple
is
ways to do
there.
it.
But for people who maybe like a little bit like me, like sometimes like when you're under like a stressful situation, it's harder to like think on your feet that well. So it's like, oh, you start panicking. I do think this system kind of works, is not very conducive to that. And
Mhm.
and that's why I think they did add the swordsman mechanic. So you have your sword. Works on a meter. So when you're in it, you deplete it. There are ways to refill it. There's a ways to enhance it. But like arrows, bombs, and sword in a traditional sense are locked behind that.
You have
Uh,
to really think about when you're gonna use it instead of just
and
resorting to that for everything. You kinda have to use it a little bit more strategically.
Exactly. So I don't know if you felt like that way about like you're talking about traversal, but like with combat. So did you feel like
Yeah.
that way about in like combat, either in remedial battles or in boss battles? And do you like hope they maybe like if they make another similar type of system, do you maybe want to see them do something a little bit differently or what?
Yeah, I mean, I think the echoes concept is brilliant, and I loved that they used it for puzzles. It just felt like during combat, it slowed combat down a little bit. Like, I felt like I was constantly opening up my menus, looking at my echoes, trying to go through the whole long list of echoes to find the one that I wanted. It really slowed down the combat in a way that didn't feel great. I agree with some of the people I'm seeing in chat here that maybe if it had been mapped to different buttons or there was just a better interface for it where it wasn't slowing down the battle so much, maybe it would have worked out better. But as far as things for solving puzzles or navigating the world, that's where I really loved the echo usage. That's where I think it really shined the most because you can scale over trees, you can find a way to get up to the top of the mountain really fast. You can skip around, or it really made the open world feel like an open world because you could just go and use your echoes to your advantage however you please, in such creative ways. So
Yeah.
I don't know. I think, there could be a better way to use it with the balancing with the combat. If they found a way to make it faster. I didn't mind it with combat, but I felt myself also resorting to the same like 2 or 3 enemies to fight for me every time.
Yeah.
Like, is it a flying enemy? I'm gonna use the crow. Is it, a land enemy? I'm gonna use this. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I want to focus on something you said because it was one of my biggest complaints. You said like the huge list of echoes because there's over a
Yeah.
hundred by the end, and it's just presented as this long, almost endless horizontal scrolling menu interface.
Mhm.
And there's another menu you can go into, and it'll present it like more vertically, like in rows, but it's still
It
neither one
slows
is.
down
But I think the
everything.
problem is just like it's the sheer volume here, and I
Mhm.
think that's why, like as you said, and I did as well, gravitate towards a few kind of core ones to keep going back to over and over again. And I don't know if there's a way to maybe tweak that if they come back to do this style of game again, where it can either be more contextual or like, certain ones are only available in like a dungeon or certain ones are available in I don't know how they're going to do it, but to talk about like how slow sometimes combat felt, fumbling through that menu to get to the right one and thinking like
Mhm.
it almost is like it's a real time combat system, but it's almost like, man, I feel like I need to think so much. It's like this would be better suited like almost like turn based or something. It's like, huh, what do I use here? What do I use here? And it does stop the
Right.
combat, but I think that's the thing. It slows it down and interrupts like the pacing so much. Or it
Mhm.
works in the world because it's like there's no real like pressure in the overworld exploring. It's like, huh, I am supposed to stand here and think about this. We're in combat. It's like, no, I need to like, dodge and attack. And I'm staying in this menu here. And then like you take so long and come back and like, oh, what was the enemy doing? It can present all kinds of like, disruptions there. So I do
Exactly.
hope they can, I don't know. That's why they're the game developers. And they'll hopefully come up with a nice creative solution. But I don't think, I don't think you literally reusing what they did again would really go over well with someone like me. I'd be kind of disappointed if they kept the same thing. But at the same time, I did like some of the creativity it offered. And I loved when I came across like a new echo that was like more powerful. So like the more powerful moblins I would get, that would be like, oh, this sword echo, this sword
Mhm.
moblin echo is like a level 2 or level like a higher level. I'm like, this is really cool. And like you said, flying ones like crows are the go-to ones. I'm like, oh, just spam a bunch of them because each one costs a certain amount of like tri power because your companion tri has these floating triangles behind them that indicate how that's their meter for summoning echoes. And I liked as you progress through the game, you got more of those. They started to
Mhm.
cost less. And so it's like, oh, now I can summon two of these. But I
Right.
think whether in combat, it didn't like, it just made combat easier for me because it was like, it was more of like, gave me more leeway. But when it came to traversal, it was like, what can I do now? Like I've been using beds so much, and like I do think beds and the water cubes were like my go-to thing. But it's like, I can maybe try some other stuff now because I have so many things. And we talked so much about the combat, and we touched upon the exploration. But did you find yourself kind of like going back to the same echoes for traversal, or did you find yourself maybe experimenting a little bit more when you were out in the open world?
I don't really think I experimented too much, but my go-to kept getting replaced as I got better echoes. So at first it was like just the crates, the tables and the crates. That's what I was using at the very beginning of the game. Then the water block was a huge game changer, especially for, vertical traveling or, replacing the bed for a bridge. It makes it so much longer. And then I got the cloud, which is what I used for the whole end game. So I really, kept using the same ones for most of it, but they replaced each other as they went on. There was also one point where I found an enemy because I did a lot of exploration around the whole world before I did some of even the early game dungeons. I just
Hmm.
wanted to unlock different places in my map. I ended up finding an enemy that was more of the little triangles than what I was able to use. So I was kind of locked out of using some echoes that I had found early in the game because I wasn't strong enough to use them yet.
I had the
which I thought was
same
interesting.
thing.
Yeah.
Mine was a whiz robe that I
Oh, goodness.
so when I got into the Farron wetlands, I came across electric whiz robe and I was like, "Oh, cool, whiz robes are in this game. Oh shit, this is way harder than any
Yeah.
boss." And then I
Yeah.
got it. I'm like, 6 triangles? I'm like, or 5? I was
Yeah.
like,
Like,
okay.
"Oh,
See you in forever." I was
see
like,
you later."
this is like always there. And the moment I got it, that was like, yes, go.
Mhm.
And it was very strong. So I
You
do
know, and
like,
I
go
feel
ahead.
like there hasn't really been like a 2D, top-down Zelda game that has had that sense of exploration and discovery. I
Hmm.
felt like I was playing a smaller version of Breath of the Wild. I explored somewhere where I definitely shouldn't be yet. It was so much harder. I can't really use what I have here yet, but I know I'm going to be coming back here a little bit later when I am stronger. I thought that was cool for a top-down game.
Yes, one of the things I'm most impressed with is just the world design in this
Mhm.
for top-down Zelda. In fact, it's the thing like I was like I think they nailed it. This is exactly what I want going forward from top-down Zelda is that you like the freedom to try and go wherever I want and do dungeons in different orders. Like that is to me like the essence of like older Zelda. And even newer Zelda
Mhm.
does that too, but like it's been one of the staples of Zelda and they have not moved away from it. This further enhanced it for me, and it felt like even as much freedom as I gave you in older Zeldas, I think like A Link to the Past and probably A Link Between Worlds were probably the two old school Zeldas that probably get top down that gave you like the most freedom outside of the original Legend of Zelda.
Right.
It felt like man, they're gonna like have some difficulty, giving you like there have to be some gates at some point. And in this one, it felt like it was honestly just yes, there were like 2 or 3 gates, but it did feel like at least you can go to like all parts of like the world without like I need the power glove to lift up this rock because it's blocking me off from this part. It's like, nah, you can go pretty much almost anywhere. It's just
If you get creative enough, yeah.
yeah, it's just some parts of like this. There's just no dungeon here yet because the story is like you have to open these rifts, and that was their way of kind of like how do we solve it so that we need people to hit certain beats, but also we let them explore the whole world at their leisure. And like I did, like you did,
It was a good
Rebecca.
way.
I
Yeah.
explored the world as much as I could before going into like the second dungeon. I believe I was like, oh,
Yeah.
let's finally go do some dungeons. I think I've gone everywhere I can go. Let's go see a dungeon, and I really like that. So yeah, I'm with you on that. I really appreciate what they did with that world,
I
world
love
design.
the map. Did you see that somebody took the Link to the Past map and put it over the Echoes of Wisdom map, and everything lines up, and then there's more of Echoes of Wisdom on the outside. And there was a lot of discussion online about, well, maybe the Gorons and the Gerudo all really existed in A Link to the Past, but they're just outside of where you were able to explore in that game. So I love that Grezzo took that, was probably a lot for nostalgia for people like us who loved A Link to the Past, and played that when we were younger, just being able to recognize different things. I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, like this is the sanctuary. I know this. This is exactly where it's supposed to be. This is where all these familiar things are. So I thought
Y-
that was really cool how they did that, but
Yeah,
still made it so that there was more out there.
yeah, I got pretty excited at the references, seeing like the inner core was like the almost like the link to the past map, but like slightly altered here and there. Or, I mean, more than slightly altered, and then like around that core central area were expanded Hyrule, and like even
Mhm.
that to me, I've said this before, felt like slight like nods to other Zelda games, like where you start off in the south. I'm like, oh, you're on like a beach shore. This feels like Link's
Yep.
Awakening a little bit, the
Yep.
whole Jabul waters area, the like ocean, like and rivers, like this feels very much like oracles right now, like Oracle of Ages, and then the Elden volcano area. I was like, this does feel like a little bit like and the expanded Gerudo Desert. I'm like, this feels like they're like the modern ones, like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom. Like they were
Yeah.
kind of like borrowing a little bit from like every like a lot of different Zelda games, and I like
Mhm.
that. But I also really appreciate while it had more probably than Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild did in terms of like nods other than just names of places. They weren't really calling things by like you didn't need to really play that ones. They didn't call Ganon Ganon in this game. They didn't call the Triforce in this game. I'm like,
Right,
and it
right.
didn't really bother me because on a personal level, I'm kind of like over the like larger connective tissue. But I really appreciated that they while these elements were there for a sense of like nostalgia, they also were like integral to the immediate story, and that's what
Mhm.
I really appreciated the most was the immediate story of this game. While it's not like a very complex story, it was more like the characters and your interactions. I really like that Zelda quirkiness for a lot of the interactions with the NPCs, but also like special highlight and shout out to the relationship between Zelda and her father in this game. I really
Yeah.
love that depiction so much more than Zelda's father and her in Breath of the Wild, where it felt like he
Yeah.
was more, I don't want to say like abusive, but
He was
like yeah,
stern and,
stern. Yeah.
not really open to helping her, whereas in this game, he trusted her. You could see that he really was worried that she was going out on this dangerous journey, but he also took her lead with it, let her, forge the path and trusted her, which is really nice.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
I, I like I really like that, and I appreciated that, and I sometimes for veterans like me in the past, like when you drop too many of those like concrete like references. You start. I feel like it distracts from the immediate game because you're like, oh, like I love like the Wind Waker story. It's probably like my overall favorite like narrative in a Zelda game, but like, and it does more directly tie to like Ocarina of Time. Like they were clearly trying to do that. But then there are other games like Twilight Princess where they start throwing in nods, but it's like in game. It's very nebulous. It's like, oh, what is this actually references? I feel like this is a big moment, but like. It like takes me out of it a little bit, and I'll
Mhm.
freely admit maybe I do that to myself sometimes, but I'm kind of more appreciating this direction they're going, where they're more focused on what's going on in game and maybe trying to build upon it within like these new games. So we'll see where they go with this. But like I kind of like more appreciate that style. I didn't want to. I was about to activate a trap card and stand on a landmine about talking about connectivity with like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, and I don't want to go. I don't want to go there. I was like, there are problems with that too. They didn't really fully embrace that, but
Right.
being more in like an anthology where they are a little bit more standalone, and you don't really need to care about how they fit. Obviously, people are going to do that. I saw people already. People who are looking at the map are trying to do that, but I
Mhm.
guess, yeah, my question to you is, did you kind of like enjoy like we haven't really talked about like the plot. Like, did you enjoy like the premise of this game? And did you like the character Try? And did you like the NPCs in this game and the world that it presented?
Yeah, I did. I can't say I liked every single, character that we met, but the overarching story I did like, and I think it was a good way to introduce Zelda as a protagonist, as the main protagonist of the game. And the story I think is a little bit slow at first. It's not really until you do those first three dungeons and then go to the Hyrule Castle and face Ganon or the still world Ganon, whatever it is, and then that cutscene afterwards starts to really explain a little bit more of the story. You get to see Link and notice that he is in the still world and is able to move around. You're able to see a tease of who the final boss really is, who's creating these rifts. And then I think it's the dungeon after that, if I'm remembering correctly, that you start to learn that the goddesses are a part of this story too. We haven't had a game referencing the goddesses in how long? A long time. And the Triforce is involved. And I like that you mentioned that they don't even really call it the Triforce. Something that I think I love about Zelda games in general is that they don't have to all fit perfectly together in, a continuous timeline. I'm not somebody who worships the timeline and every game needs to fit in it perfectly. I'm more of someone who appreciates that each game is a legend, that there are some things that are similar, but then they call things differently in some games or they do things differently in some others. But they still kind of have these same themes going on. So I liked that it started to come together in that sense, but still had its own identity, I guess, and its own version of Hyrule. Um, so I liked it. I'm glad that it was a little bit more than just, you fight Ganon as the final boss, and you're saving Link at the end. You get to work with him a little bit in the very end of the game.
Yeah. I'm curious, last thing I'll ask about like narrative. Did you catch most of like Link's backstory? And like Link's character development through that? Like, and what did you think about any of that?
I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but I remember reading in one of the little diary entries in one of the houses was about how he was caught into the still world and he was able to escape, but like many others, he was changed and lost his ability to speak. So they gave him like an in-game lore reason
Yep.
for why he doesn't talk. And you actually see some other characters, that are affected by the same thing, like they're shell shocked, they can't speak, or their bodies are paralyzed, like they still have some effect after being in the still world. So Link had that happen to him, but he's also able to, move around and be in the still world because he's a chosen hero. He's one of the Triforce Force holders.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of cute that they were trying to like give like like a lore
Yeah.
reason for why he didn't speak. I mean, Breath of the Wild also like did a similar thing, like, oh, he just doesn't like to speak. But like this was like maybe dealing with it in a different way where it's like it's traumatic. Like,
Yeah.
it's you went to this place and like there's negative side effects, but that as well. But there was like also a little bit more lore, unless I'm misremembering this, chat. You could call me out if I'm getting this wrong. But from what I remember, Lou Berry saying is that like Link was like always kind of like like stronger willed of like his group of friends. They would always hang out, and he was the one who like kind of like helped get them out, guide them out of the rift from
Mm.
the still world. Like, he was the one who figured out a way back, and when he came back, he made it like his mission to like go and help other people and like try and stop the rifts and like and like he had like these villagers who loved him, and I was like, oh wow, like doesn't get usually like this kind of like backstory and
Mhm.
like setup. And I
Little
mean,
small town hero.
yeah, it was like I appreciated it because it was just like nice to get some more. Just because I at this point truly believe like Link is like defined character, and I
Mhm.
want Nintendo to go a little bit further in giving him more personality, giving him more narrative and story. I mean, I'm a pro give Link a voice and speak at some point in like the 3D ones, because if everyone else is speaking around him, it just gets weirder and weirder to me. I know some people are like, I don't mind. I'm like, for me, it just takes me out of it. So I
Mhm.
did appreciate that. I really like that. So it was nice to
Yeah, and
see.
I thought it was interesting that it's kind of a version of Link that is kind of an unknown type of hero. Like he's known in his village, but Zelda and the king had never heard of him
Yeah.
before this game started. He wasn't really known outside of just his own little secluded village. It's not like he was somebody in Breath of the Wild where he trained as a knight and was really well acquainted with the royal family. I think some other games where this happened was like Twilight Princess. He was in his own village before he became a hero. Even Zelda didn't know him. Another thing that I thought was interesting was that other kingdoms, the Gerudo and the Gorons and even the Zora didn't even really know who Zelda was.
That was surprising to
Yeah,
me. Yeah.
they're
So
like,
I'm
"I
glad
think
you
I've
found
heard
that.
that name before," or like, but then I was thinking, maybe they know who the king of Hyrule is, but like, why would they know the name of the daughter or know what she looks like? Do we really know the kids of other countries' leaders or royalty? Like sometimes, maybe, but not always. But also maybe they're just so secluded from that central Hyrule kingdom that they don't really do relations with them. Maybe it's farther away than what most people travel.
Yeah, I'm glad someone. I know other people. I'm glad you said that too,
Yeah,
because there are just times when like
I
Zelda
was
said
thrown
her
off.
name and they were like, "Oh," and I'm like, "But you're also like, aren't you like related to like the leadership of this
Yeah.
area?" And like,
It
uh,
made me wonder why she needed her disguise in the Zora and Gerudo areas if like they weren't gonna turn her in. They don't know who she is.
yeah, I also like think like yeah, I guess they could also just like argue like, well, anytime she was near like Hylians, like they would recognize
Right.
her, and like
Yeah.
that's one other quick thing. As I know I keep saying this, people in chat probably heard me say this like 5 times now, but as someone who grew up like on like the older Zelda games as well, and like the fandom like when it's like early days, one of the popular like in-game jokes and like even like I think it caught on a little bit beyond like the Zelda community. It was like people calling Link Zelda, because the game was called The Legend of Zelda. So you'd have people like, oh, so you're playing as Zelda, and like, no, that like this is Link, this is Zelda. So like the whole thing about like getting them confused. And then in this game, because she is wearing Link's cloak, so many people go, oh, hi Link. Oh, you're not like. I was
Yeah.
like, it was a reverse. I was like, I kind of appreciate whoever was doing that game, like they like writing as like you've been you're a real one. You've been there since like the early days, so I kind of
Yep,
like that. That was
yep.
kind of fun. I want to ask you. So there's two big things I want to talk about as well. Involving like world design and dungeons. And I want to start with dungeons because we were always looking forward to like the return of more traditional dungeons. And I want to get your thoughts on how they implemented dungeons in this game, like the design. So remember, like the entering, like the like the lead up to them, the still area, and then like the
Mhm.
dungeon proper. Like, what do you think about that combination for how they handled dungeons?
Yeah, there's like 2 or 3 big things that I wanna say about this because dungeons are my favorite part of most Zelda games, like, that is just what makes it for me, so I did not like in Breath of the Wild, the divine beasts. I hated those, they all felt the same to me. I didn't like in that and in Tears of the Kingdom having to go and press 5 switches to, open the door to the boss, and, like, that was the dungeon. So I was so elated to see that the traditional dungeons, in a sense, were back in this game because I love, that it's kind of a labyrinth. You have to get keys, unlock doors, fight a mini boss, and then fight like a true defined boss for the theme of this temple. So I loved that aspect of it so much. I'm so glad that it came back. I did not mind the still world lead up to it. It just felt like by the time that I got to, the last couple dungeons, it felt kind of old by that point. Like it was the same thing every time. You have to go find like, 3, 4, or 5 little orbs, whatever they were, to get all of Tri's friends. And it was just very samey after a while, but I didn't mind it. You kind of had a little bit more limitations, I think, with the world being set up differently. You really had to think about, well, this is a piece of land, but it goes up and vertically, and there's trees sticking out. How am I going to navigate that? So I didn't hate it. It just felt kind of done by the time I was doing like the 4th, 5th, 6th dungeon.
Yeah,
Um, yeah, and then the very last thing that I wanna say about the dungeons is that, on one hand, I really appreciate being able to do them in any order. Like, they give you a little bit of freedom, with the first you do the first dungeon, then you can pick either the Zora or the Gerudo dungeons, and then for the second half of the game, you can pick the order of the 3 that you do. And I like that, but then also I felt like the game's not getting any tougher. I think back to some of the older Zelda games where, the last couple dungeons that you would do are some really tough experiences. Like I think about A Link to the Past and how long and tough the Turtle Rock dungeon was. I think about the Minish Cap and, the Palace in the Sky or whatever it's called. Like what a tough dungeon to get through in the late game. And I think I picked a really bad order for Echoes of Wisdom because I did Farron first, and then I
okay,
did the Lanayru, the Hebra Mountains one, second, and then I ended with the Elden
okay.
Temple,
I
and
already
I
know where this
felt
is
like
going.
I
Yeah.
ended with the easiest one.
Mhm.
It kind of was not a letdown, but it's like, oh, I felt like I'm so strong now, but the things around me aren't getting harder because they could have been done in any order. I was looking for a little bit more challenge in the late game. Um, so that's, it's kind of a pro and con. You get to pick where you want to go first, but you have to remember that it's not going to be scaled in a way that, makes sense. So that's kind of how I felt overall about the dungeons. Loved the designs overall. I'm very glad to have those back, and I love what they did with them. But, you have that trade off of didn't really feel like it was getting harder as I went.
Gotcha. Yeah. I did those last dungeons in the reverse order of what you did.
Oh, yeah,
So I
okay.
actually
So you
thought
probably had a
like,
better experience.
yeah, I think like the Hera Mountain one was like maybe a little bit more, although I do like it was like a different type of challenge. I felt like than the Farron Wetlands one, but
Yeah.
those are definitely the two most complex, along with like the Hyrule Castle like mid game one,
Right,
were like the
right.
three big ones, and then like yeah, the Jabba Water, Gerudo Desert, and the Elden one were kind of like the more simple, like not simple, but like the more beginner ones, I would say.
Yeah.
And yeah, I guess yeah, it would have been nice if like if you're getting like a set and it's like the final set, they still give you the freedom, but they try to balance them so that they're all kind of like equally challenging. so that at least you could say like the last set there, oh man, these were all really tough. But I would say like 2 out of 3, but like I guess it was just like, an unfortunate like odds play there where you like, some people might do this order where they're going technically backwards. And like for some people, like
Mhm.
they might find something easier that you find difficult or vice versa.
True,
So I
true.
guess it's
Yeah.
kind of like hard to, trying to think in the shoes of a game developer and designer, that might be a little bit tough. But yes, I like it's still, a valid criticism. So I
Mhm.
do agree with you. If I'd done it in reverse, I'd probably been like, oh man, this last one was so easy, At
Yeah.
least I felt the same way. Going back to the still worlds and the rift. I kind of with you that they kind of wore out their welcome. I did appreciate them because I felt like it was a valiant attempt to reconcile the freedom that they were trying to give you with the echoes, as well as the design philosophy of like the three new 3D Zeldas, where I do like even it like that you can go anywhere as long as you're creative about the solutions you come up with, especially in Tears of the Kingdom. Um, I do feel like that the problem with me in Tears of the Kingdom's dungeons is that freedom allowed you to bypass so much of the dungeons. There were certain
Yeah.
puzzles you still kind of had to do, but how you went about doing it, it was like you kind of could trivialize it. The one I always point out is the quote unquote fire temple that I like this whole minecart system I didn't even use. I'm like, oh,
Nobody used the
I just
mine
skipped all
cart.
this stuff. I'm like, what? What is this? You need to find a way to force people to have to engage with these elements to give them that feel, in my opinion, to give them the feel of the old school dungeon. And I feel like the still areas in the Rift were, here's this freedom. Use your freedom to get to the end goal and like to complete this area. I think the problem is they need to be like give you more incentive and make them more interesting, because they started to
Mhm.
look kind of like samey and feel like they didn't have the same vibes and atmosphere as the core dungeon area. And I think if they can think of unique objectives to accomplish that are associated with
Mm.
each core dungeon to tie it into the theming and atmosphere, in my opinion, that would like probably like nail it. So like they're just gonna
I agree.
give you more interesting stuff to do in those areas, right? To make it
Instead of
not so
just find the
repetitive.
5 orbs,
Hmm.
kinda thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but I agree with you about like the core dungeons, like the return of keys and like stairwells, and like you have to solve these puzzles. There were a few things like so feel like I'm pretty good at figuring out like Zelda puzzles, but I feel like I'm good at calling them out when like this didn't really clue you in very well. So I understand why people. There were like two instances of that where I
I have
felt
one.
I was like, mine was in the ice dungeon. I forget which is that the mountain one with the GPU fans that heat, and like I didn't realize they could cool. So there's a
Oh,
room
yeah.
with water where you heat it up. It's covered with ice, and you need to like raise some stuff up to unblock a passage basically. But when you heat it up, it becomes water, and the things you
Mhm,
need to raise up sink down. And like, oh, so like but you had to you have to heat it up to get a key to get in there.
mhm.
So I was didn't realize all you had to do is like go back, go get the key, now refreeze it, and you have the solid
They didn't
floor
really
again.
explain that
And
at
so
all.
I didn't know the orb could change like to
Yeah.
different like
The
properties.
only reason why I knew that was because when I was grabbing the orb, I accidentally dragged it over the
Uh
fire, at first, and it heated it up and changed its color, and I'm like, "Oh, like, that means something," but had I not accidentally
uh
dragged it over the flame, I might not have ever realized
it
that.
happened to me later
Yeah.
because I did that and I'm like, oh wait, does that mean it could? Oh, and then
Yeah.
I was like, I remember I just looked at the camera chat. I'm like, chat. So that's I did that room like the way harder way of doing it.
Oh, no.
Like you could
Yeah.
have just frozen it because I was like, anything I put down because there's like this right
Mm.
side you have to block these thermal vents so that Link can get up onto this platform. But everything I put there would just sink down into the water. So I'm like. I eventually just like had to like I found a way that just worked, and I'm like, okay, that it took so long. It was like I think it
Yeah.
was like it took longer than most other dungeons for me to like solve. Like
Just to
yeah,
figure out that puzzle.
yep.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are a couple things like that that I feel like don't do a very good job of showing you that that's how the mechanic works. The first time I encountered this was in the Farron Temple, but I think there was another dungeon that used it too. Was there were two like buttons on the ground, and I'm like, oh, I need
Yes.
to put the statue on one, and then I need to
Yes.
stand on the other. But then it wasn't opening the door, and I'm like, what is it like? Does it have to be a certain statue, like in the Gerudo Desert Temple? Does it have to be something specific? And I'm trying like all these different combinations and I'm like, why is the door not opening? I eventually had to ask my friend, I'm like, hey, can you like give me a hint? Like, what am I doing wrong here? Turns out they had to be both pressed at the same time, which the game doesn't tell you or explain or give you any hint towards. I'm
The
like, oh,
I'm
maybe I'm just stupid.
No, I'm with you. So I managed to figure that one out. That's the other like so you said there
Yeah.
was two, those were the two for like those are
Mhm.
my two. The ice, the fan switching that could go hot and cold, and then the statues because I was like, huh. I was like process elimination like maybe I have to like different things need to put on. Maybe it's a weight thing, but I was like in past Zelda games, like because it exists, there are different ones that take like Majora's Mask did it. It's like, but the size of the button gets bigger when it wants more weight on it. So I'm like, this doesn't seem right. And like the lights on it, like I see now what they were trying to do, but I don't think it's clearly communicated through the lighting
Yeah.
of the buttons when you step on one. So like I was like, maybe they have to be at the same time. And I was
Yeah.
just going through all the ideas I had, and I did that, and it worked. I'm like, I like you can go get the VOD, like someone can go get the VOD and get like clip it for me. Like I was like, that's bad.
You
Like
could see
I
the
was like,
gears
that is
turning.
not
Yeah.
communicated well at all. I'm like, I'm sorry. Like that's no, 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 no,
Yeah.
no, no.
Usually for those tougher puzzles, they, kind of spoon feed you the, concept of how it works, and then they set you up to do it on your own later. But I don't think there was anything like that in this one, which, couple
Exactly.
tough puzzles,
But
but yeah.
besides like those one or two like kind of bumps in the road, I was generally pretty pleased with the core dungeons. I felt like they did get better theming wise as well. Like I think when I
Mhm.
got to like the first like the I did Gerudo first. No, I did no, I did Gerudo first after as the first of the two you could pick.
Yeah,
I
me
was like,
too.
it's okay, interesting. And then I did like the Zora one. And I was like, oh, water stuff. I'm like, okay, this is getting like they did even though they didn't get more challenging, they progressively got more like I think the theming they got good theming on them and it felt like I was in more unique dungeons, especially for as much as they can do within a top down old school. Because if you look at like all the old dungeons, I'll honestly say like probably the Minish Cap has like the most uniquely themed of the old school top down ones. When you're like thinking of
Mhm.
old school ones that have great themes, it's like they're still 3D. It's like when you look at Ocarina,
Yeah.
Majora, Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword,
A
like
lot of the best
they're
dungeons are, yeah,
3D, and it's a
3D
little bit
games, absolutely.
easier, I think, to create a unique theme with those when
Yeah.
you're not confined to a top down for sure.
I did appreciate also that, because typically in Zelda games you get to an area and the people there are having a big problem. And of course, in this game, all of them share the common problem of the rifts, but I liked that they didn't just leave it at that. Each of them still had another thing that they were tackling. Like the Deku Scrubs were mad about their cotton candy or
Yes.
whatever they were eating. Like it was so silly, but they had a problem that they were facing. The Gerudo, they had one of their leaders that was actually an echo that was like a disguise among them, who was kind of trying to get them to do the wrong thing and hurt them. The Gorons were faced with a chief that just didn't feel confident about himself and was like obsessed with following these rules on his
Oh,
father's
I love
on
that
his
one,
father's stone
yeah.
tablet. Like, so they each had a problem. And I of course just want to mention, the Yeti Conde or whatever his name was,
Yeah.
Condi. I loved him and I was so distraught when we finished that dungeon
That
and he
was
wasn't reunited with his brother.
it
I'm
was
like, "Oh my god,
sad.
that was so sad."
Yeah, that one was
Um,
sad.
I don't know if you saw in the credits, we're looking closely at the pictures, but you can see one of the pictures, he's looking at the hot air balloon, so his brother is alive and well and comes back to see him. But that one really, I think, was the one that tugged at my heartstrings the most.
Yeah, I think despite this being looking on the surface such a lighthearted game, there were some like dark, poignant moments in
Yeah.
this game, and I do appreciate that because it adds a little bit of like gravity and stakes to like what's going on. Like even like we was talking about the cotton candy, it's like someone their friend's home was like. Like they're like I kind of want my home back. I'm happy
Yeah.
everyone's an endless food, but like it's coming at the cost so I don't have a place to live anymore. And they're like,
Yeah.
but like, dude, you got like endless cotton candy. How cool is that? So like, yeah, everything wasn't painted in
The
such,
writing was funny.
yeah.
There's a lot of text in this game. I think probably a little bit too much text.
Mm.
But some parts were very humorous and well written. I think they could have cut the text, by, take 10% of it off and it would have been better.
Yeah, it can get a
A
little
lot
bit
of reading.
it can get a little bit wordy at points. I'm definitely of that mindset too. But
Yeah.
yeah, I appreciate like yeah the setups for the dungeons as well. I will say the last thing I want to say about like dungeons is that I still don't think like they're the strongest dungeons. They're I would say like they're like above average in my
Mhm.
ranking of them. But I do feel like we haven't quite fully gotten back to some of like the best themed dungeons, and I understand like they're have been restrictions in the past, but I do think that we have these like creative freedoms with the design that they're doing and the like with the overall design they could make and like what they tried to do with like the rift the still areas in the rift. It's like maybe you can employ that a little bit more into like the dungeon philosophy as well and like balance it out and give me like everything doesn't look like just blocky blue or like
Mhm.
some of them a little further like the ice dungeon had like ice and everything. It's like the Gerudo desert had like sand, but I guess like I'm thinking of like a little bit more like atmosphere in there and like the music. I think the music did help a lot too. But
Definitely.
like weird settings as well. Like I think of like some of the best dungeons. It's like looking at Twilight Princess, like when you snowboard down a mountain and it's like wait, there's a mansion and that's the dungeon.
And
Like
that's the dungeon,
I would like to
yes.
see a
Yes.
like more like that,
Things like
possibly.
the sand ship or like,
Yep.
there's a lot of really good interesting ones, and you're right, most of those are in the 3D games.
Yeah, I would love to see them like try something more like that going forward. But I understand, when they're trying a new blueprint or something new, they play it a little bit more safe. And I
Mhm.
appreciate this because it's was such a nice return for dungeons for this game after seeing them kind of like fall to the wayside in Breath of the Wild
Yeah.
and Tears of the Kingdoms.
I thought the boss fights, all the boss fights I thought were really, really great designs and great battles, especially in a setting that you don't really get an item that's going to dictate how the boss battle works. In most of the other games, the older games, you get like, here's the hook shot, and you get to use the hook shot as the prime item in the boss battle. So you had to get creative with that.
Yeah, I got excited there because I have a question, and I hope you
Oh
did it a
yeah.
different way. The boss of the ice dungeon, the Yeti with the
Yeah.
helmet. How did you hit? Well, what was your solution to hitting the helmet with the damage the helmet?
I think I used fire keys and ice keys and,
Okay,
like, employed those as it was the opposite,
okay,
element.
I,
Kinda it reminded me of the Twin Rova fight in Ocarina of Time, where you
y-
had to hit it with the opposite element.
people were asking like if you didn't like because I had elemental whiz robes at that point. And
Oh, okay.
so
So
they were
you were
like,
probably just a little
and
bit
but
stronger
they're in
then.
the air too. So that people are like, well, how do you solve it if you don't have some flying enemy? And I was like, well, duh, there's like elemental keys as well. But I'm like, yeah, what if you didn't have
What if you didn't have that?
flying
Yeah.
elemental things? I'm like, I'm trying to find like all the different creative ways to like,
Right.
was there ever like one that felt too difficult because you didn't have like the quote unquote right echoes?
Right
Did,
thing.
did
Good
you ever have a
point.
moment like that or no?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think now, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to say what the intended solution for the bosses are just
Yeah.
because there are so many ways to do them. But I think it also did a good job of making sure that you had, a helpful echo to do the dungeon. Like they introduced the water block before at the very start of the still world of the Zora one so that you had that. You couldn't really progress without getting that, and that was going to help you a lot during that dungeon. So I think they did a good job of making sure that you had something that was gonna help you work through it,
Yeah. Like
which is good design.
that's a good point. That's probably yeah. It seems so obvious now that you say that the dungeons probably themselves presented all the tools you would need to the echoes. Like
Mhm.
if as long like you if you as long as you picked up some echoes in that dungeon, if you hadn't encountered them before it, I'm gonna guess the dungeons gave
Yeah.
you the appropriate echoes.
They
If
gave you, like, the snowball at the start of the ice one, maybe you coulda used that if you didn't have, like, an ice keys or something, I don't know.
Mhm.
But oh, and the other thing with dungeons, did you find any of the optional dungeons in the overworld?
Yes, so the mini dungeon type thing. So the
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
shipwreck and the Eastern Temple,
Yes.
like
Yeah, yeah,
that
yeah.
one. Yeah, I was blown away by like because the shipwreck one was the one I found first. I'm like, oh, there's this ship here. Is this important? And I'm like, wait, it was like, is this a dungeon? Yeah. So what? Yeah, what do you
Yeah.
think of those?
I ended up going back to the shipwreck one after I've already done all the Zora stuff, like, way later in the game, and I'm like, "It's kind of weird that this is here and it wasn't used in the main story, like, there's gotta be some kinda secret here, like a piece of heart or something," and that's when I found out how to get into it, but I loved that both of those optional ones had a throwback boss that was kind of like a boss in a previous Zelda game. I
Hmm.
think there was, like, I don't know what their names are, but the one from Jabu Jabu's Belly in Ocarina of
Baronade.
Time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know if it was called the same
I
thing, but,
don't.
like, it was a
Yeah.
throwback, and then the one that was in the Eastern Temple was one of the ones from the Oracle games, and I just thought that was, like, kinda
Yeah.
cool that these are totally optional, you may or may not find it in your playthrough, it's a good reward if you do it, if you do find it, so, just a little bit more, I guess, motivation to explore the world and try to go through every single nook and cranny.
And what's amazing about that is I think we both it sounds like we both did the same way. The shipwreck, we just across it and did it. But there
Mhm.
actually are quests, there are side quests that will actually
Oh,
so I did all that and then found the NPC who started talking about it. I'm like, wait, I did this already. And as soon as he finished, he was like,
oh,
oh, you did it. I'm like, oh, so there was an NPC or a quest that would have told me to go
okay.
do this because same with the temple. There's someone waiting
Yeah.
outside who's like, hey, I need you to go do this for me, but I'm scared to go in there. I'm hearing
Oh, I think I
voices.
saw him, yeah,
Yeah,
I found that one, but not the NPC for
so
this for
almost
the shipwreck
everything
one.
there's a lot of stuff you can come across that you can just do on your own, but a lot of a good amount of it's also tied to side quests, and there are
Mhm,
a good amount of side quests in this game, and they are structured more like uh Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom, where they're presented with like a
mhm.
red exclamation mark over the like NPC's dialogue. And yeah, like there felt like there was a lot of side activities to do, where there was like getting like unique echoes with by exploring caves. Doing like actual mini games. There's like a whole
Mhm.
bunch. But real quick before I forget, I'll let you talk about all the side activities. But there's one thing I got to know, because it is tied to a side activity. But you could ride horses in this game. Did you find
Yes.
yourself really doing that a lot? And like, what did you like? I'm
Um
curious.
I didn't really, but, I did a little bit, but probably not as much as I could have. I don't think most people probably chose to ride horses as much. I think it was more of just, a nice little nod, a nice little extra thing that you can do, because I found the horse riding to be kind of frustrating at first, because you couldn't really do much if you found yourself around enemies with horses until I did the horse races. When I got my white horse, since I was able to claim her as Princess Zelda, I got my white horse, and then I was able to do the horse races. And one of the prizes for that is a horse accessory that lets your horse do damage to enemies as you're riding through them. But I didn't do that until like really late in the game. And I feel like that would have been helpful right off the bat. So if I had done that sooner, I might have used the horse a little bit more. I just felt like it was a frustrating experience before I got that charm.
Yeah, I think the controls for the horse weren't the greatest. So even
It's
with
hard to
the
turn with
ability of that,
them.
and plus
Yeah.
once you have all those waypoints established, I'm like, part of the fun was traversal with your echoes, and I'm like,
Yeah.
horse kind of like it was cool for the trailer moment. It was cool for that in-game moment when you finally got it. But honestly, like I mean, I guess it's good to have options. Like I'm not against them like keeping it in there, but I'm with you. I'm kind of with you where I didn't find myself really utilizing it outside of like the necessary side quest or activities it was
Mhm.
tied to, the ranch and the horse racing. I was like, after that, I'm like, oh, I got this cool accessory. Oh, I'm probably
Yeah.
not gonna use it anymore.
Well, I will say that I did use the horses more than I used the automatons. Is that what they're called?
Oh,
Automatons?
the well,
I found that late into the game and I did not bother with it at all. Like, I feel like that could have been completely scrapped from the game and it would not have made a difference. I don't see anybody who's posting clips online using them. I don't see anything creative being done with those. I think instead of them focusing on that extra mechanic, I would have rather liked to have like one really long, in-depth side quest, like a trade quest or some kind of story
yeah,
quest. Like, I feel like a lot of Zelda games have that one side quest that stays in your memory for a long time, like the Terrytown quest, the Anjo and Cathay quest, the trade sequence in Link's Awakening. Like, there just isn't really one like that in this, and I would have liked to have seen something like that instead
yeah.
of the automatons.
No, I'm agree with you, and I'm glad like you brought it up like that because now I realize you're right that I agree with you that they didn't have that one big quest that like almost every Zelda game kind of has, and this was done through like Dompe. I will say like it was kind of funny to see how he's not like the gravekeeper; he's like an inventor.
Yeah,
So that was like a nice kind of like
totally different for
mix
him.
up, but. And I was like, "Oh, we're gonna have to build these things." So I was like, "This is gonna be the big quest, huh?" But like, whoa, what are we building? Like, am I gonna build like like, oh, like permanent? Like, you're gonna make me use these things permanently, and they're gonna be like, I can fight like normal, or am I gonna get like cool stuff that's gonna be like amazing? It's like, I mean, they might be cool, but like, yeah, they're these like automatons that are like, I don't know,
They're like
stronger, but
little
like,
robots.
yeah, they're
Yeah,
like mechanical echoes that like super
yeah.
echoes, but like they can break, and it's like,
And it didn't really solve the problem of being able to get into combat faster or deploy them faster because you have to wind them up, and it takes too long to
yeah.
have it be worthwhile.
I
Why
like
can I do a robotic Tektite when I can just do a regular Tektite?
I mean, I thought it was funny about their names and stuff they came up with. I was like,
Yeah, oh yeah, it
someone
was
had fun
funny.
with that. And there is an accessory that speeds up the winding time, but like
Okay.
I didn't bother with them. I only did it for
Yeah.
completionist sake. I'm like, oh, let me put these together for Dompe and like, knock this off the quest list. But yeah, good point there that like it really could have been something a little bit more meaningful. But the other stuff in there, like what did you think about some of like the other side quests and like side activities? I mean, we mentioned like the dream challenges. I mean, you talked about the horse race. Like, were there any
Mhm.
others or anything that stood out, or did you feel like maybe they weren't as good?
I think I like the ones where, it was a little bit frustrating if I did, just kind of like a fetch quest, and I didn't really get anything good rewarded from it, like just rupees or like a golden egg, which, is good for making smoothies better. But I liked the ones that had, a little bit more involved and you got something really good. Like I don't know if you did the cat side quest in Kakariko, which of course, me being a cat lover, I immediately did that one as soon as I could. As soon as I heard there was a cat suit in the game that lets you talk to cats. That one wasn't just a regular fetch quest. You had to go talk to certain people and do things in a certain order and kind of do a little bit of investigation. And, I like that one because then you got something cool out of it. You got an outfit. I like the ones where you get the outfits out of them. Just because I wish there were more of those. There weren't really as many outfits as I was thinking that there would be. Three of them are tied to amiibo, so you don't really have to do anything to get them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah. I'm
gi-
with you.
give me give me more of those. I want more of the outfits that do cool things.
Exactly. Like fashion is the true end game for any game out there, developers.
Yeah.
If you want people to like keep playing your game, you give them more outfits and stuff to like aspire to, even if they don't have like functionality behind them.
Yeah.
Just people like to mix it up. I will say like yes, the the cat suit. I was like, I get to talk to all the cats. I was like, all right,
Yes.
game, see you later. Like quest, like I need to save Hyrule. No, we're gonna go talk to all the cats
Cats.
now. So like
I
stuff
gotta
like
go back to Princess Zelda's
oh,
room
that
and
was
talk to her
so
cat.
and yeah, the cat's like, "It's okay, everything's fine here." I was like they're
Yeah.
like looking over her
I'm
bed.
taking good care of your room.
Yep. I was like, "This is okay. More of this,
So
please.
cute.
This is great." But the costumes and the accessory rewards, especially
Mhm.
the accessories, because you can expand slots
Mhm.
and you can mix and match. And I felt like one, they need loadouts. They need to be able to save like different ones. I don't think it was as
Yeah.
problematic as some other games where it can get more comprehensive. So I would have
Oh,
liked a
if
way to.
there were dozens and dozens, then they would have definitely needed that.
Yeah, I think all I wanted was one where, because I got a lot of those scrolls. So we talked about the dream challenges where you go into those like those challenge arenas and you have to complete them. When you do all of them, you get these scrolls that slow down your swordsman meter depletion, and they stack. So you can get three of
Mm.
them, and it basically makes you stay in it like an entire boss fight. You can be
Oh
in
my
that.
gosh. I've barely done those dream sequence things. I should go back in and do
Some
those.
of
That would have
them
been really
are.
helpful.
Some of them are. They have ones where you can bring in your skills, your echoes, and there are ones that are called like, I think they call them like naked is their word for it, where
Oh
it's like
no.
you have to start learning the echoes from within that challenge. You can't bring anything in.
Oh, that
So
sounds
it's like
tough.
the Breath of the Wild Tears of the Kingdom
Yeah.
shrines where they take away everything and you have to the blank slate. They're called blank slate. Thank you, Sumo.
Blankly,
I
okay.
was like, wait, what is it called? Anyway, the when you complete those, but those takes up 3 slots, and you can only have a maximum of 5 if you expand
Hmm.
everything. And then there's like so many other integral ones. I feel like the one that lets you jump higher. It's like,
That
oh,
one's
that's
necessary.
like necessary.
Yeah.
But then you have like ones that like I won't sink in quicksand. I won't slide on ice. It's like I
Yeah,
won't
you
get.
don't need to have that equip all the time.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, like there's certain ones, and like there's ones that like make items appear more frequently. There's defensive
Mhm.
ones. I was like, oh, so like it wasn't too overwhelming, but like, I loved it. I actually want this more. I'm like, oh,
Mhm.
you have builds, and it's like this is like very RPG like. I was like, this
You
is
have to
kind of nice.
decide. Yeah.
And it's
Yep.
not too complicated. So I actually really like that. And some of the outfits as well. I think Tears of the Kingdom Breath of the Wild went further obviously with the outfits because I thought I was gonna get like a one to insulate me from the cold in the mountain. Like, oh, I'm clearly gonna get like like a coat or something, and like you
That's what I
don't. And
thought.
I'm like,
Right.
oh, you got to use potions, the smoothies. There's smoothies, and there's you can also concoct potions, I guess, too, which are just like
Mhm.
super buff versions of the elemental resistances. So like you can make
Mhm.
one that's like 5 minutes long to resist the freeze, so like you can freely explore the mountain. But I was like, would have been cooler if I could have gotten a code and just like
Yeah.
done it
Just like
that
in
way.
Breath of the Wild. Yeah.
Yeah, so I kind of like missed that. Although Zelda does react when you idle, like in the Gerudo Desert, if you let her stand still for long
She
enough.
goes,
Yeah, I was like, okay, that's kind of nice to have quirks like that. I like that.
yeah. Yeah, and there are other ways to do it too, just like in Breath of the Wild, where if you maybe ran out of potions or forgot to make them or the smoothies, what I did for a decent portion of the snowy area was I just held one of the fire zoles
Yep.
above my head. I just held it and it kept me warm.
Yep. That was the I'm gonna guess a lot of people use
Yeah,
that
the
as their
ignizoles,
solution.
yeah.
It's like, what's the simplest, most obvious thing? And then you have people are like, I built this device and like, oh, I didn't have any trouble whatsoever. So it's like, yeah,
But you know what? Even if you had to take some cold damage or heat damage or whatever, I just made a bed and healed, whatever hearts I
yep.
lost. All you need is just a little tiny safe area for a minute and it heals your hearts and you are good.
Yeah, finding creative ways to buy time to like lie in your bed so you could heal up, and it's like, and you get
A
better
princess
beds
needs her sleep.
eventually. Yeah, that heal you
Mhm.
faster. It's like the bed
She needs her
meta.
beauty sleep.
I did see some people mention that like because I kind of found smoothies generally like I almost didn't use them at all, and
Okay.
I thought it was like kind of a gimmick to me. Like it was a good trailer moment. Oh, you make smoothies, and like in game, like characters are referring to these smoothies, and it is a side quest. Like you got to craft enough recipes to like you'll earn rewards for that. But outside of like that mandatory checklist for completion, functionality wise, I wasn't really relying on them. Now, someone did point out
Mm.
that like some of them also replenish your swordsman meter as well, and
Yeah,
so if
that's how I used it a lot.
so you could just stack up on those to
Yeah.
keep fighting more traditionally in a boss fight if you wanted, and that's
Mhm.
I think that was a very good use of them. Even though I didn't use them, that sounds great. Yeah.
It's an option. Yeah, just like everything else.
Like yeah, I guess like just overall, like, did you feel like there was enough incentive to explore in this game? Because I've seen some back and forth on that, like people wishing there were more activities to do, and then some people like me who I feel like I was pretty satisfied with the amount of things they threw at me in terms of like world incentive to explore the world. I'm wondering where you kind of like fall on that.
Yeah, I thought that it definitely was because there were places, that I never would have touched in the main playthrough, like the main story of the game, if I hadn't been going out there and exploring. And, I don't feel like it was an empty open world. I feel like, they found a way to put, a cave in every corner, and there's places where you can get heart pieces, where you have to like find a creative way to get up to the top to get that heart piece, or just NPCs scattered throughout the world. There's those acorn challenges scattered throughout the
Yep.
world, which I didn't really love those, but it was something that I stumbled upon and found and was able to do it there. Like it didn't feel like I had to go too many steps each time I found something to do. And I think that some Zelda games have a problem with that, where there's just a lot of empty space with nothing to do. So I really didn't feel that way. I was pretty satisfied as well.
Yeah, I'm glad. Okay, I'm glad to
The
hear that.
stamp guy, which who he was silly.
Yeah,
There was something, there was always
yeah,
something.
exact. Yeah, okay. I'm glad you felt that way.
Yeah.
Obviously, if you don't feel that way, that's fine. Like, but like to me, this is one of the strengths of like the older style of Zelda, like top down or the more limited Zelda world scope, because it's
Mhm.
easier to pack more into it because you're not making a giant, massive 3D open world. It's a top down 3D Zelda, which is not going to even remotely come close to approaching the scale of Breath of the Wild or Tears of
Exactly.
the Kingdom. So I felt like, especially when you get the ability to like like when you open the map and turn on the collections and you see like the dots of like everything that is
Yes.
there, it's like,
I didn't
oh.
realize you could do that until embarrassingly late. I saw somebody else do it and I was like, wait a second, you can do that? That makes collections so much easier. Especially not everyone tries to go for 100% completion, but for the people who do, that helps you see, okay, well, I already found a lot of things in this area, but this part of the map, there aren't a lot of markings yet. Maybe there's something around here I should go explore.
And yeah, I don't think I picked up on that till pretty later in the game
Yeah.
too, and I started like utilizing it. But they also do throw you some like assistance too. There's an accessory that's like a bell that will start ringing when you're near might crystals. And even
Mm.
so there's some hidden in the world. These are the things that you take to Luberry, and an NPC, and they will power up your
Mhm.
swordsman abilities. We talked about it earlier. So like your strength of your sword, how long the meter lasts, the strength of your bombs and arrows, and like you can like enhance them. But also ones that are through quest. I didn't realize that at first. I was ringing in this area. I'm like, where is this thing? And I'm like, oh, there's an NPC with a quest. Oh, it
Mm.
will even let you alert you to quest and mini games that will have those as rewards as well. As like, that's
Nice.
pretty nice. There's
Yeah.
a NPC, which I don't need to needlessly spoil who they are, a big NPC later on, who will tell you how many echoes are remaining in certain regions that you missed. So if you're trying to complete your entire echo list, it
Mhm.
will let you know. And that's
That's
kind
good.
of like nice as well. I think the only thing that's not there is there's not something that like indicates where heart pieces are. But honestly, like I think there's like maybe one or two that might like cause some people to look up, but they don't stumble across them. There was one I had to look up, and I was like, oh, I just forgot about this spot because I didn't use the pin system on one of the spots. I was like,
Mhm.
oh no, that was like a needle in a haystack type thing, which is sometimes frustrating. There is one thing with the echo though. I had to look this up, and I'm like very curious. Like I guess I don't. I was surprised like that people figured it out, but I guess it's not too surprising. There, because like there's a shadow version of this. Because when you're in the still world, those like dark matte blobs will sometimes like
Mhm.
go into you and then spawn like shadow enemies. There was a shadow enemy of this thing. I'm like, I didn't see a normal version of this in the entire game. And it's like,
Mm.
there is one. And it's very complicated how to get it to show up. And I'm like,
Huh.
oh wow. And I'm like, I didn't even know about that. I would have totally missed that if I didn't even look it up. And I'm like, oh, there are like some
Some
secrets in this
actual
game.
secrets,
Like you
right,
like they're
yeah, I
not
like
giving
that.
you like it's contextual. Pay attention to the environment. Like,
Mhm.
oh wow, like there's I felt like there's a little bit of something for everyone, honestly, when it came to like the world incentives to explore the world. Sorry,
Mhm.
yeah,
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'm sure there's a lot of things I haven't done 100%. I will plan on doing it, over the next week or so, but, you're right, there's just knowing that there are those secrets that you might not find on a normal playthrough unless you're, like, really looking and really trying to find everything is pretty cool.
Yeah. Also, because my colleague Michael Huber, my friend and colleague Michael Huber, loves difficulty options. I don't know if this is the very first Zelda where at any point you can toggle difficulty. There's
Yeah,
master
from the
mode and
very beginning.
standard, and it's like very beginning, but in game you can just switch it. So it's like I
Yeah.
was like, oh wow,
I
like
think there are some games that you can switch it, like, during the game, but not until you've unlocked it
y-
after beating it once.
yeah, I thought there was always something they had to
Yeah,
unlock, and it's like,
yeah.
oh,
I'm glad that they offered it in the beginning.
or yeah, like it's nice that they're starting to like learn a little bit of that. You did
Mhm,
mention earlier, I do wish button remapping would become more standard with Nintendo games because when we are talking
mhm.
about the controls, I just remembered why one of the things felt like I was fighting controls. The summon echo and dispel echo are on such oddly different buttons, and then like the stasis thing where you reach out and grab things and can like move them with that green beam thing. So it's like
It's a lot to
the
learn.
green beam
Yeah,
thing and the echo spawn are right next to each other, and then like the
yeah.
dispel is one of the shoulder buttons. I'm like, no, I was like, I want the summon and dispel next to each other. To me, in my brain, like that's perfect. And I want the
Mhm.
lock on thing like over, like make that like the right trigger, what that is. And also the targeting system in this game, I didn't feel like needs some work. Like the lock on
It was
needs
difficult
some
when there were
work.
multiple things on screen and you wanted to target something specifically. I felt like I was just kind of spamming it randomly until it locked onto the right thing, whereas, I wish I could have. Maybe there is a better way and I just don't know it, but locking on and, like, moving to the next thing on the screen instead of hoping it just like, randomly
Yeah.
locks onto what I wanted.
Yeah.
But,
Hopefully they can think of
yeah. I
something
mean, I
because
know that there's limitations with, a top-down kind of style game, but it feels like there's maybe something they could be doing better with it. I don't know what that is, but yeah.
yeah, but it sounds like you're definitely enjoying this game. So that's
I have an overall positive experience with it, and, I hope that people don't write it off because they think that it's, very passive way of fighting and, it's not very traditional in the sense that you have your sword and shield the whole game. I was very pleased with it.
yeah, I am like very excited about like I hope they get Grezzo gets another chance to build upon this game, or at least Nintendo gives somebody a
Mhm.
chance to build upon this game because I see so much potential. Like there's so much they could build upon in this game and reach new highs with this. So I really hope they get a follow up with this game. I do think though they need to swing a little bit in terms of giving you some more standard abilities on top of like the echoes. And honestly, like I don't understand like why Zelda couldn't like use some more traditional things like magic. Like even if
Right,
Nintendo
right.
wants to be pedantic and be like, all right, we have our set ways with like our lore and our rules. I'm like, which I wish they would just be get over that a little bit. Like you're all like so uptight about that, but then when it comes to the timeline and like lore, you're like, you're like, come on, like
I know.
you're a double standard here. But whatever. I think like she's used magic. It's like, oh, let her use like magic. And like when
Mhm.
Impa did that cool ninja stuff in the beginning, I'm like the teleporting. I'm
Yeah,
like. Sheik, I'm like, come on, there's so much potential here for like what
I
Zelda
know.
could do. And I'm like,
Especially because there have been games where Zelda has used the bow of light, at
yeah.
least something like that, she has had done combat like that.
Exactly. So I think there is a way to for this in terms of combat, have your cake and eat it too moment where they give you these unique if they want to bring back echoes or something similar. But I think more than just spinning around, twirling
Mhm.
and cutting grass, there should be some basic stuff. Now, maybe if
Yeah.
they want to make it like more limited and restrictive, sure, to like encourage it. But I do feel like that like a core set of like offensive and defensive capabilities should probably be there, and I think that'd be a good way to balance it. I don't know if other people feel
Mhm.
that way, but I'd like to see
Maybe
it
there's
go
a
that way.
sequel where now that she's the hero of Hyrule, maybe they let her do some sword training.
Yeah, and that's what I want to like kind of like go toward like as we wrap
Yeah.
this up is ask like where would you like to see it go like next? Like you want more of this, and like is there anything else you'd like to see added to it? And yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I don't really mind if it's Zelda as the protagonist again, or if we go back to Link as the protagonist. That part doesn't really bother me. I just Really love that they are returning to some traditional roots with as far as like the dungeon and exploration goes for top-down games. I was so worried that we would, like I said, that we would never get another one like that again, with how massively popular the 3D games have gotten. So I'm glad that they're doing that, and whatever they want to do with adding another mechanic to it, just keep giving us this type of traditional formula in this style, and I'll be happy with it.
All right. Last two questions. The art style they use for this, same as Link's Awakening. Do you want them to keep using this type of art style, or would you like them to move on to something a little bit different?
Um, I do like it. I like the aesthetic of it. It looks, very cute, very toy-like. I wouldn't mind a new one just to kind of give it its own identity. And less so about the art style and more, I guess, about like the movement. I like how the movement feels in this game a little bit better. I didn't like how there was just kind of the eight directional. It felt like I don't even know how to describe it, but just the movement of Zelda felt a lot better in this one than Link's Awakening. So I appreciated that. If it made it so that the development time is not as long, I wouldn't mind to see a third game in the style, but I'm always for new art styles and exploring new aesthetics.
All right. And last one, because I know you still like love a lot of like about retro Zelda. If you had to pick which type of Zelda style the next one would be, would you want like Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom? Would you want something more just like what we had with Echoes? Or would you want something different, like one of like a different style of older, like more like Ocarina Majora style game? Like what do you personally want the next Zelda to be like?
In terms of art style or
No,
just in terms
design
of
like
gameplay and
design and
style?
structure, like,
Oh.
vibes like that. Yeah, not art. Yeah.
I love the big creative types of projects like Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, but I feel like it's gotten so massive, like they can't really go back at this point, but the development time takes so long. I don't know if I want to wait, 6 more years before getting another game like that. So I would love if they did, some smaller projects, maybe a subset of the team could work on a more traditional 3D game like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, like those types of games, while the bigger team works on the next brand new adventure. But maybe that's also kind of what they had Grezzo do and give us, a smaller bite-sized top-down game. So I don't know. I really like the old traditional styles, and I know it's hard to go back to those for a lot of people, but I hope they don't give up on it because maybe it's just nostalgia, but I love it.
All right. Yeah, I would love that too. I want it all. I want
I
all the
know.
types, but
I feel like we're very spoiled as Zelda fans. We get these types of games, on an almost yearly basis at this point. So it's hard to complain and, be sad about a couple years to wait when you have games like Metroid or,
that's
games that take forever to get a new game.
very, very true.
We're very spoiled.
Yes, we are. Very true. And honestly, yeah, I would just be happy if we got like more of this type of game because there could be a reality where we just only get remasters and ports and then Breath of the Wild style Zeldas for like next like
I know.
generation basically.
Yeah.
And this is, nice to have some semblance of this again. So
Filling the gaps of it. Yeah.
for sure. Well, I think that's gonna about do it. Unless there's something else we didn't talk about. If not, that's pretty much all I got for this episode. So thank you so much for joining me. Before we sign off here, could you let our listeners and viewers know where they could follow you if they want to check out more of your stuff, Rebecca?
Yeah, like I said, I'm Forest Minish on places like Twitter and Twitch and trying to post TikToks and stuff. I don't know. I just love talking about video games and Zelda is my absolute favorite. So thank you so much for inviting me for this episode. I can talk about Zelda all day. And yeah,
Always a
that's it.
pleasure. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy weekend to join me. And thank
Of
you,
course.
chat. Thank you for your participation and your input and questions. It always helps. And for our listeners and viewers, thank you for your support. Again, we will be back probably. We've been sticking to this every other week schedule, so I think that's pretty much going to be set going forward. So hopefully we'll see you in, or we should see you in 2 weeks from today. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this episode of Solo Queue. Thank you so much, everybody, and have a great week, and see you next time.